Hello, welcome to County Connections. I'm Judge Houston Wells, and today we have a special guest, Mr. Russ Hatter. I grew up listening to Russ Hatter on 1490 WFKY radio through all those years. Russ, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the great historical facts about Frankfort.
Well, thank you, Judge Wells. I appreciate that. I appreciate being on the County Connection program. It all started for me, really, when I was in school back in Cincinnati, a little old school called Elmwood, and then Green Hills. And my history teachers were excellent. And because of them, my interest in history has brought me to this point in my life here at the Capital City Museum. But it all started, Mr. M. Holmes and his great world history class and American history class of others. And when I came to Kentucky, I went to Kentucky Christian College, which is in Grayson, Kentucky, in Carter County in the eastern part of the state. And I got interested in exploring caves. And because of the bats that were connected to the caves, I started reading up books by Willard Rouse Gilson, who lived in Frankfort, Kentucky. He was the state geologist for many years and also involved in history and written a lot of books. And so when I came to Frankfort to work at WFKY in 1965, the first place I wanted to go was to meet Willard Rouse Gilson. I had been to the old Capitol. Back then, their museum was in the old Capitol building. And I would go up on the second floor and look at this little light bulb and a string of rope that was next to Floyd Collins in the cave down there in Sand Cave in western Kentucky. And I was just fascinated by that. And so I went to speak to Mr. Gilson, and he thanked me for talking about him on the radio because I'd already told everybody this story on the radio. So anyway, through him and through my radio, I decided I would try to tell a little bit about Frankfort on the radio. So we developed a little 5-minute program, and we consulted historians of Lexington and here in Frankfort at the Kentucky Historical Society and began reading books. In our library here at the museum, we have many, many books on the history of Frankfort, Franklin County, as well as Kentucky. And it was through the radio program I was able to just talk to my listeners and say, what about that place out there on the Georgetown Road where South Trimble lived? And they would call in and say, I live in the house. You're welcome to come out here and visit, and that sort of thing. So it was a great opportunity to know more about our community through the listenership. And then when I left the radio station in 2001, I was fortunate enough to be associated with Nicky Hughes, his friend, and I became his assistant here at the Capital City Museum, and he was the curator of historic sites at that time. And that's where we really started building up a historical repository of our Frankfort, Franklin County history. And there's a lot of fascinating stories that I love to tell. Of course, the name of Frankfort, Kentucky came from an event that happened in 1780 in the month of March. A bunch of guys were leaving Lexington, heading toward Louisville in that area on a salt finding expedition. 1780 now, that's how they cured their meat. And so while they got to the Kentucky River, they had to stop because of the river. Now at the end of Benson Creek, where it comes into the Kentucky River, was an island. The silt from Benson Creek created that island. It's called Fish Trap Island. And the Native Americans, who were very upset that the white guys were coming in, taking over their territory, they would often lie in wait and just wait for somebody to come by because that's where everybody crossed. So Stephen Frank was one of those guys. He got killed by the Indians, and they called it Frank's Ford. Now, to the south of us is the little town of Stanford. It was named for its standing fort, Stanford.
Huh.
But it was named for a fort, but they said stand Ford.
Ford. Uh-huh.
Frankfort is named for a ford, but we call it Frankfort. Only in Kentucky can you get away with that. Yeah.
That's something.
So that was an interesting story how we got our name. But after the Alamo and Santa Anna was captured and was being taken by authorities to Washington, he stopped in Frankfort, Kentucky.
Really?
They stopped out on the Georgetown Road at a little tavern, and they had him stay there for the night. They were afraid to have him in Frankfort because a lot of people had relatives that were involved in that war in Texas, and they were afraid they'd kill him. So they kept him out of town. Well, a bunch of guys got involved and got a posse together, and were going to go out there and kill Santa Anna. So when they get out there to the little tavern, Santa Anna says, wait a minute, don't you know me? Don't you recognize me? I'm your friend, Nathaniel Sanders. Nathaniel Sanders was one of the original trustees of the city of Frankfort. It was not that man. It was his son. He had had an illegitimate child by a Mexican Indian, and he named him Nat Sanders II. Now, you can go to all the history books about Santa Anna. We've got 12 in our library, and none of them mention this story. But if you go to the Sanders family, you'll find books written about it, and all of this happening, and he knew all about Franklin County.
And so that was Santa Anna.
I don't know. It's the most craziest story I've ever heard in my life.
First time I've ever heard that.
But it's there in the record books as history of our community. Our town was founded by a guy by the name of James Wilkinson. And James Wilkinson was...
where Wilkinson Street's named for.
Wilkinson Street. He laid out the streets of Frankfort, named all of them. Ann Street, where the museum is located, was named for his wife. And Washington Street, of course, for George. Clinton was not named for Bill. It was named for George as well. And other streets here in downtown Frankfort. He was here for a very short time. He saw Frankfort as a trade center, that the farmers could bring in their hemp, their tobacco, their whiskey, and all this sort of thing, put it on boats, send it down the Kentucky River to the Ohio, down the Ohio to the Mississippi, where they would sell it at New Orleans. Now, Mr. Wilkinson signed his allegiance to the country of Spain. He was Agent 13, and he told everybody, never call me by my name, just use Agent 13. Wow. And for almost 20 years, he was under the aegis of the Spanish government.
Wow.
He tried to, with Aaron Burr, who was also in Frankfort, Kentucky, drumming up an army to take over the Louisiana Purchase and make Aaron Burr the president of the Louisiana Purchase.
Under Spanish rule.
Under Spanish rule, but it was ours. So he was going to take it over, and Wilkinson was going to be his second in command. Of course, we know what happened to Aaron Burr. Wilkinson turned him in because he was afraid he's going to get caught. Wow. And so it wasn't until about 100 years later that we found out that Wilkinson was under the abeyance of Spain, and he was a registered agent.
So, Russ, what about Frankfort becoming the capital? There's always a great story behind that. We hear about the keg of nails and all of that.
Our most famous man, who is mostly forgotten, is Andrew Holmes. Andrew Holmes was a property owner and a lawyer. He lived in Lexington, but he owned a lot of property here in Frankfort, Kentucky. And when Wilkinson left, he sold all his property to Andrew Holmes. Andrew Holmes, when the state government was meeting in Lexington, found out about what are we going to do for a state capital. If we make it Lexington, Louisville will be angry. If we make it Louisville, Lexington will be mad. How can we please it? So the politicians did what they do best. They created a committee. And this committee was designed to figure out which town should be the capital of Kentucky. So about 10 towns vied for that position. Leestown, just up the road here. And over in Woodford County, we had Petersburg, which is now a house today. Ledgerwood's Bend is underwater, under the Kentucky River. And there were several other communities. We might have been in Nonesuch, Kentucky, because they almost got the position over at Mortonsville. But anyway, Andrew Holmes, rather, he went around and knocked on the doors with his hand out. Said, I want money. We're going to make this the capital of Kentucky. And this was a little old muddy town, the river
About
that
what
spilled
year
over.
was this?
This would be in 1795, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And so he gets the money. He owns all this property, so he gives the property to the Commonwealth of Kentucky, where the old Capitol is today. And by the way, that's the third old Capitol building on that spot. First two burned. So this other one is with us. But he gave them the property that was there, and he gave them the tobacco warehouse down at Leestown, which is where everybody had to bring their tobacco to sell it, and then it would be put on a boat and then taken down the river for big sales. So he gave, for 10 years, the money that was made off of that tobacco warehouse to the state government. He gave them Wilkinson's old house that was located on the corner of Wapping and Wilkinson Street to use for their first meeting. So that's where our state government first met, was over there on that corner. So Andrew Holmes is the guy who manufactured and engineered this whole thing. That's the only thing that we have to remember Andrew Holmes by, is Holmes Street.
How about
that? He's a fantastic person. He
made
it happen.
Yeah. So there's another interesting fact about Frankfort and the Civil War and some of the things that happened during the Civil War here.
Right. We were the only northern capital to be taken over by the Confederates during the Civil War. They came in here, they made a raid on Richmond, Kentucky, and then they took Lexington, and then they took Frankfort about September the 2nd or 3rd in 1862. And they were here for 1 month. And while they were in the process of meeting their new governor in the old Capitol building that stands there today, here comes cannon and cavalry out of Louisville. The Union forces came in and ran off the Confederates. They went, many of them, through our railroad tunnel. And they went on over toward Versailles, and a few weeks later we had the Battle of Perryville, which was the bloodiest battle in Kentucky that was fought. But that is something of great interest. 1864, we might have lost everything. John Hunt Morgan, not him, he wasn't here, but his raiders came into Frankfort in June the 10th and 11th of 1864 with the idea of taking out our bridge and destroying our Capitol building and burning the railroad bridge, which they did. And they were also going to destroy the armory. We didn't have any soldiers at Fort Hill at that time, and we were lucky. The Peaks Mill Rangers came to the rescue. It was local Union people and the people. That's right.
Union. Okay.
They were the Union folks, and they were issued muskets, and it was school teachers and just anybody that would volunteer to help. We had about 200, including one of which would later have become the Supreme Court Justice of the United States, John Marshall Harlan. He lived here in Frankfort, and he's quite an interesting fellow. In his wife's memoirs, she tells about how he said to those soldiers or those townspeople that were there to protect us, aim that cannon a little differently. You've got it aimed right toward my mom and dad's house over there where Tanglewood is today. Yeah, so that's a great record to see, and our town was really held off. Had the Confederates been successful in that 1864 raid, they no doubt would have taken out our courthouse, our Capitol building, the armory, arsenal, and then they already had figured they would make Louisville the capital rather than rebuild here in Frankfort. So the town itself is the reason we're still the capital of Kentucky. I love this town. Yeah, awesome. This community is just fantastic. I came in 1965, and I've been here ever since. And I'm probably going to die in my chair in there in my office.
You do a lot of other things, and some of those you have been doing walking tours of Frankfort. And tell us a little bit about that. And I think you've changed, but What do the walking tours consist of?
Well, the walking tours consist of various historic parts of Frankfort, which are easy to tell in a short space. Our little town is surrounded by hills, so consequently we didn't get to expand like many other communities did. So everything's pretty well within walking distance to tell stories about. And I found out in researching that in a 100-year span of time, there were over 30 murders that occurred in downtown Frankfort. So in putting together a murder and mayhem tour that really is a history effort, an educating program, we came to find these places, and we take people through the dark alleys at night in the month of October, every Thursday night.
Okay.
We leave here at the museum at 7:30. And by the way, if anybody wants to come, be sure to get your reservations in pretty quickly because it fills up very fast. And it's amazing. It's the election riots we had, the Democrats and the Republicans, how they would battle to get the black vote. They would have these riots and try to take black people, put them on boats and send them up the river so they wouldn't vote for Abraham Lincoln.
Wow.
It's just amazing.
One of the most famous murders that have happened in Frankfort is Goebbels, Governor Goebbels. Tell us a little bit about that and what you've learned historically from that.
Well, everybody wants to know who killed Goebbels, and we don't know.
I wasn't going to ask you that one, but
we don't know yet to this day who actually did it. We know who pulled the trigger, we think, but nevertheless, it was January 30th that he was shot. He had just been...
what year?
This was 1900.
1900, okay.
1900. And what happened was, in the 1899 election, the Republican candidate was elected governor of Kentucky.
17.
18. No, it's 1898. 1899.
1899, okay.
Yeah, and he won, Sylvester Taylor. And Taylor was having his inauguration party and everything, and they went through all of that. And then we had the Democrats saying, no, we can't lose this election. Let's have a recount. So they had a recount, much like we had back in 2000
for the president.
For the presidency, right. And in the recount, it turned out that the Republicans did win by a little over 2,000 votes. So then the Democrats, they literally stole the election and made, the legislature was all Democrats, about 90%. So consequently, the Republicans, they shot him.
Oh.
They shot him in the chest. The bullet went through his chest and rattled around, and really, he could have probably made it if he had had the medical technology we have today. But then they didn't. Within 3 days, he was dead. There's one little story goes with this that Irvin S. Cobb tells, and we have an exhibit here in the museum about it, that he says he helped carry Goebbels from the site by the old Capitol where he was shot to our museum building, because that's where the office of Dr. E.E. Hume was. And so we have that on display in the museum, a room dedicated to the doctor's office and Governor Goebbels' body. And he says, I'm going to find out what happened to Goebbels, just what were his last words, because on the monument that you see that used to be in front of the new Capitol building, it was moved by Governor 1962, Bert Combs. Combs moved it over in front of the old Capitol, but it says his dying last words were, tell the good people of the Commonwealth to be steadfast, loyal, and true, something along those lines. So he goes to Dr. Hume and says, Doctor, just exactly what was it that Goebbels said? You were with him. He said, well, the governor, he had his favorite meal. It was a plate of oysters. And when he got finished, he looked over to me and he said, you know, Doc, those sure were pretty damn bad oysters. Then he went into a coma and he died. Oh. So we don't know if that's true or not, but that's the story that goes. And we've had a lot of stories like that about Frankfort, Kentucky.
So much history, Russ. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. I know that we didn't even touch on lots of things that we maybe we'll do another time, like the cemetery and all the things at our Frankfort Cemetery, how historic that is, and other areas of town as well. But you have been so enlightening, and thank you for what you do in our community. As a matter of fact, you touched on murder and mayhem and that you're doing that. So if you would, tell the audience again and how they go about and when that's happening and how they go about getting tickets to that.
The actual Murder and Mayhem tour is every Thursday night in October. We leave here at 7:30 and it's done by 9 o'clock. To get your reservations, it's $10 per person. You have to be 18 or over, and you can call the museum at 696-0607, or you can email me at russh1214@gmail.com. And that's the best way to get those tickets. Or you can come to the museum and get signed up here. We're open Monday through Saturday from 10 to 4, and we're free.
All right, great. It is a great museum. I hope that if you haven't seen this museum, come down and see it. And if you have seen it, the exhibits are always changing. There are all kinds of great exhibits here. And I want to thank you for watching Mr. History, our historian, our local historian, and telling us those interesting tidbits about Frankfort. I know he's got a bunch. If you ever get an opportunity to talk with Russ Hatter, please talk with him because he is so knowledgeable about our community. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, this has been County Connections. We hope you like and share our post. Thank you so much.